And I want to bring in David Nakamura now, who covers the White House for the Washington Post. David, welcome. Jared Kushner, he has a very big portfolio. Late night comics have made fun of the fact that he seems to be doing just about everything that the White House wants to get done. How does him being caught up in this investigation impact his ability to be Superman?
Well, we don't know. I mean, first of all, we would want to know whether his role would change at all. And I think that's unlikely. I think, he's obviously one of the president's closest advisors as well as a family member. And it seems clear that Donald Trump places a lot of confidence and trust in Jared Kushner carrying out what the president wants. And that portfolio ranges from foreign policy as a sort of chief liaison in the White House to China and Mexico and other countries, as well as domestic sort of issues about reforming government operations and trying to make government more efficient. That's also in his portfolio. I don't think that's likely to change. What's interesting, though, is that there are some suggestions that President Trump could meet directly with Russian President Putin in early July in Germany at another economic summit where the president will be attending on the sidelines of that, and whether Jared Kushner is able to sort of help put together those meetings. That's another one of his roles. That's a little unclear because obviously there would be a lot of questions about the nature of those discussions.
So Kushner's lawyers have said he's willing to cooperate with investigators, which sounds great, but one wonders, is there really another option for a person in Kushner's situation?
Right. I mean, it seems like it would be hard for them to say they would not want to participate or cooperate. That would lead to a lot more questions. You asked earlier about whether he would testify before Congress. It would also be unusual if he were to try to object to that, because it just raises a lot more questions, as you see with Michael Flynn, his lawyer, talking about him potentially taking the Fifth Amendment and not discussing the nature of his meetings with the Russians. But a lot remains to be seen. And right now, Kushner went on part of this overseas trip with the president, but has since returned and now is back at work at the White House here in Washington. All
right, moving on to ye olde Washington story about the balance between substance and style. CBS News has learned that when the president returns from overseas, he'll be presented with ideas for restructuring his communications and messaging inside and outside the White House. As these various scandals unfold, one has to wonder, is messaging really the problem, or is it deeper than that?
Well, it's funny you say that. The president had expressed great frustration the last couple of weeks before he left Washington on the foreign trip about the nature of the storyline here, which was all about the scandal. We had, 2 weeks ago, a number of explosive stories, both in the Washington Post and New York Times and other outlets, about the nature of the ongoing investigation with Russia. The president was extremely frustrated and said in an interview with Fox News he may think about ending the daily briefings or changing them, or even himself doing more news conferences so he could directly answer questions. We'd love that. But we don't know exactly what this will look like. There are a lot of suggestions that Sean Spicer's role could change, that they can introduce more briefings from his deputy, Sarah Sanders, who had done a few weeks ago and apparently got decent reviews from the president. But I think the bigger question is the White House seems to be exploring the idea of having creating a sort of a response and a war room of such to take on these Russia stories and aggressively fight back on that. And I think they felt like they've lost control of the narrative here in Washington. I think others would say, look, it's not really a communications problem, though. It's a political crisis right now, and ultimately that's what the president's got to deal with. This administration is trying to find a way to get out from under this and move forward with some sort of governing agenda, get back on track with that. Because I know a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill would like to see the president focus more of his time on that.
Yeah, the administration seems unresolved on some really big issues regarding Russia, and the biggest of all being sanctions. No position is the current position of the White House. As the messaging changes, if it changes, what will you be looking for in terms of matching action with words?
Well, you're right. Gary Cohn, the chief economic advisor on Air Force One, I believe, yesterday, as the president was traveling from Brussels to Italy, told reporters in a small briefing aboard the plane that was asked about the sanctions, as you said. The question was, would this administration lift sanctions? He said they had discussed the sanctions issue with members of NATO, plan to do so maybe more with these G7 countries in the summit that's going on right now in Italy. But then he said the administration has no position. I think the administration has been looking at it, though, and they've made hints in the transition that they might be open to doing so. That's in some degree part of what these communications had been about during the transition with Jared Kushner and others with Russian officials. But I think we'd want to see, obviously, whether in the lead up between the end of this summit in Europe to the next summit in July in Germany, where Vladimir Putin will be participating, whether you'll see any movement by this administration to sort of test the waters with Congress and other places about whether lifting sanctions make sense.
And as the NATO summit comes to a close, what are you looking for in the final hours?
Well, there's a number of things. One of the biggest is the climate deal. The Paris climate deal struck under President Obama with numerous countries. What we're told right now is that the president has had a meeting with the other G7 leaders in which they impressed upon him that they'd like him to remain and the United States to remain in this Paris Accord. President Trump has rolled back a number of regulations under the Obama administration on automobile emissions, power plants. He's going the other direction, but there's still a division in the White House whether or not to formally pull out of the Paris deal, which would make a lot of waves. Of course, we're told that the president listened, that he explained that if climate was important to him. He has said he will make a decision as he gets back here to Washington. So that's what we're looking for. The other big topic on the agenda in Italy is terrorism, which the president's been talking about quite a bit with Theresa May of the UK and other leaders.
All right, David Nakamura of the Washington Post. David, thank you very much.
Sure, anytime.